Welcome to the Resilience Podcast. I'm Brad Hook, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Anna Machin. Dr. Anna is a doctor in the field of evolutionary anthropology. She's a writer and a broadcaster renowned for her work in the science and anthropology of close human relationships. She's a pioneer of fatherhood science, a topic that we explore in today's interview, as well as having a really unique approach to the study of human love, combining techniques, research, explanations from both the biological and social sciences. It's an absolute delight to have the opportunity to connect with Dr. Anna today. Please do check out links to her books, such as Why We Love, in the show notes. Dr. Anna, welcome to the Resilience Podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
So perhaps for those who are not familiar with your work, you could give us a little bit of background about you and the work that you do.
Okay, well, I'm an evolutionary anthropologist, which basically means I study the evolution of the human species, but I specialize in the neuroscience and evolution of close human relationships. So how we evolved to be such social beings, how we evolved to maintain our bonds over a really, really long period of time, all the different sorts of relationships we have, and also particularly what love is and how love binds us to each other over the years.
Okay, interesting. So for those who are interested, and I think everyone is interested in the concept of love, the practice and the science of love, how would you define love?
Well, that's a really tricky one
Yeah.
because that's actually what my job is. And I've been doing it for like 15 years now, trying to answer the question, what is love? And the deeper you dig, in a way, the more complex it gets, but the more fascinating it gets. So there isn't a straight answer to that, I'm afraid. I think
That's good.
science knows science knows more than we ever have about what it is from a scientific perspective. So we can tell you what genes are involved. We can tell you what neurochemicals are involved. We can tell you which bits of the brain are involved. We can tell you various aspects about the psychology. We can tell you why it evolved. But the thing about love is those are all objective measures, and we can objectively measure those in you. But first of all, there's a really subjective bit to love. So I don't know that how I feel when I'm in love is how you feel when you're in love. And I will never really know, because I will never be able to put myself in your position. So there's always going to be a little bit of love that's subjective and highly individual, which I don't think science will ever be able to touch, first of all. And secondly, human love is really complicated because it has two key dimensions. It has that scientific side, which is all the biology and the chemistry and all that kind of thing. But it also has a cultural side, which is a bit that also interests me. Even though I'm a scientist, as an anthropologist, I'm interested in how our culture and our history and our society and our politics and all these things also influence our experience of love. Because whilst the things we all share in terms of how love operates, because it's highly individual, that individual variation is what really interests me. So I'm afraid there isn't a straight answer to that. At the very basic level, yeah, it's got two dimensions, biological and cultural. But beyond that, you kind of have to define it at each level that you're talking about. So I can give you like the neurochemical definition, or I can give you the psychological definition, but actually they all come together to tell you what love is.
Perfect. That makes sense. Now, when most of us think about love, we go straight to romantic love. And perhaps that's this romantic ideal that we watch on Netflix is not necessarily realistic. What are your thoughts?
First of all, yes, we do always jump to romantic love, which I think in a way is a bit of a shame, because actually what we're so lucky to have as a species, and we are unique in this, is that we have so many different options to love. You know, it's not just romantic love. You know, you can have familial love, or you can have friendship love, or, you know, love for your community, or love for your pets, or love for God. You know, there are so many different ways of loving. So it's a bit of a shame that we always jump to romantic, but it is because in our culture, it's kind of seen as the pinnacle of achievement. And if you, as you mentioned, Netflix, I mean, I once counted how many dating shows there are on Netflix, and it's just, there's hundreds of the things. You know, we're fascinated by romantic love, and in a way we're sold that that's the ultimate achievement. Again, that's a bit of a shame, because actually there are many other sorts of love which are just as good for you, just as healthy, just as fulfilling. And secondly, you know, as you say, it gives you an ideal of what romantic love in particular should be like. And romantic love generally doesn't turn out like it does in the storybooks or in the fairy tales. It's much harder. It's much more complex. And in a way, yeah, I think it gives us a false hope, which sometimes doesn't really turn out.
Yeah, Very true. Uh, So you mentioned something there about it being good for us. What are some of the benefits of love in terms of
Well,
health
I'll
and
tell you.
well-being?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell you an amazing statistic, which is really held out by the data now after lots of different studies, is that the relationships you build, the nature of your social network, the nature of your place within it, your degree of loneliness, the number of contacts you have, the number of people you love, is the biggest factor in your health, mental and physical health, and your longevity. And we know that now. So beyond all the healthy things you're told to do, quit smoking, be a good weight, eat healthily, exercise, all these sorts of things, the biggest thing you can do is be social. Okay. Build good, healthy social relationships, because those are the things that actually underpin a lot of your health and particularly your longevity. And there are various reasons for that. First of all, just being embedded in a good social network means you get loads of support, emotional support, practical support. It means that, if you are poorly, there are people there to look after you. But it's also, we know that the neurochemistry that's released when you're with somebody actually, first of all, underpins your mental health. So it's a wonderful cocktail of things like dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin and beta endorphins. So first of all, they make you feel better mentally, but also in particular, the endorphins underpin your immune system. So if you're with people, you tend to have a much stronger and reactive immune system than you do, for example, if you don't spend a lot of time with people. So I always bang on about this, but you read all these books and you see all these advice columns about being really healthy, and they're all great and they're all true. But quite often what we forget is that number one, which is in a way the most fun one, which is just go out and be social with your friends or your family or whoever.
And that's the foundation of
Yeah,
of injecting some love into your life, love of friends, love
absolutely.
of the
Absolutely.
experience.
Exactly. And that's
Mm.
why I do try and sort of squash romantic love down a little bit, because people say to me, but I don't have, a romantic partner. And it's like, but look around at you, of the relationships you have. All of those relationships are feeding your health, not just romantic love.
Mhm.
And particular friendships. Actually, friendships in a way bolster your immune system more strongly than romantic relationships sometimes, because they're less stressful. Romantic relationships are quite stressful sometimes. And we
Mhm.
know from studies we've done on friendship that actually a lot of people, their friendship is their most non-judgmental, fulfilling relationship where they can really be themselves. And those are really powerful and they are very important for your health. So you can ditch all the others. You can ditch romantic love. You can ditch, if you don't want to have children, don't have parental love. That's fine. If you don't get on with your family, fine. But don't ditch your friends. Your friends are actually really critical to your health.
Interesting. Now, what about the evolutionary purpose for love? Do other species experience forms of love? And what is it? Why is it so adaptive for humans?
So the evolutionary reason for love is to make sure we stick together, because humans are probably arguably the most cooperative species on the planet. And we have to cooperate or we will not survive. So the environment in which love evolved, we needed each other to just subsist. So to help us find food, to help us build shelters, that kind of thing. We also needed each other to learn from each other. So there's a lot to learn as a human. And if you try to do it on your own in a sort of trial and error basis, you quickly find yourself in trouble. So we learn from each other. And that's actually a really rare thing in the animal kingdom.
Yeah.
So we need each other to do that. It's called social learning. And then we also need each other to raise our children. Human children are born completely helpless. If
Mm.
anyone's ever looked after a newborn baby, they are so incredibly taxing. And you need a community of people around you to help. And as they get older, you still need that community. If you think of the modern child, the number of professionals they have around them, whether it be doctors or teachers or whoever it might be, helping you raise that child. So but the problem is that, as we all know, cooperation is really hard, particularly if you don't particularly like the people that you're having to cooperate with. And so what love is love is just biological bribery. It was the thing that evolution came up with to make sure that we invest in these survival critical relationships, even if they're really hard and even if they're really, really stressful. And that's all it is. So it's a set of neurochemicals which motivate us to start our relationships and then reward us for sticking in them. So if you want a really cold, hard scientific definition of love, that's what it is. It's
That's what it
biological
is.
bribery. And that's why it's evolved. Other animals, yes, other animals do experience love. And I think we're increasingly finding that our idea that we have a love experience, which is very separate to other animals, is not true. It's a very gray area. I think the only thing that separates us from the other animals is that cultural dimension of love, that social dimension of love. As far as we know, chimps don't write poetry, and they don't spend a long time, philosophizing over what love is, and they don't have rules about love and all this sort of thing. But we know some of particularly the higher mammals, such as the cetaceans, so the dolphins, the whales, such as, the higher, greater apes. They all seem to have the set of criteria which underpin human love in terms of biology and psychology. So they definitely experience something quite close to what we experience. And even, tiny little mammals, little voles or whatever, they have some of the neurochemistry that we have, and they have this bonding experience to make sure, for example, their kids survive. So love is like a spectrum. And there's an amazing, he's unfortunately died, but an amazing effective neuroscientist called Jan Panksepp. And what he said was, love is like the cupcake, okay? So you've got the cupcake, an unadorned cupcake. That is love. All humans have done is put loads of icing and sprinkles on the top. But you don't need the icing and the sprinkles to experience love. And that's I like that analogy, that actually lots of animals have the cupcake. It's just we've decided to, as we do, overcomplicate matters by adding lots of other stuff on top. But actually, a lot of animals experience love.
Yeah. And coming up, as you said, culturally, with what it should mean to be in love based on songs and movies and all of these influences. Okay, great. How important is self-love? Is that a starting point for people?
Self-love is a different concept. People ask me this quite often. So is self-love love? No, it's not, in terms of if we're looking at it scientifically. Self-love is just a term we've given to caring, looking after ourselves, making sure that we, invest in our own mental and physical health. It does not come under the umbrella of love, because if we put you in a scanner and said, just think about yourself and your self-love, we wouldn't see the fingerprint of love in your brain. Okay. So you don't get the set of neurochemicals released by interacting with yourself. So it's not true love, as we would call it. It's a term that we've come up with to, say that, you need to care for yourself. You need to look after yourself. And sometimes you need to put yourself first. But it's not love in the truest sense of the word.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I guess, would a narcissist qualify as loving themselves, staring in the mirror? Maybe that's another topic.
They would. A narcissist would, but narcissism is a psychological mindset.
Yes.
And again, we wouldn't define what they're experiencing as love, even though they obviously love themselves. So.
They're experiencing a form of love.
Yeah.
So interesting. What do people say when they discover that you're an expert in the field of love, like at a dinner party?
I quite often get, people will say to me things like, "Are you studying me now?" And I'm like, "No." Or they'll say to me, oh, particularly if I tell them about the work on genetics we've done, they'll say something like, "Can you do that for me? Can you tell me?" And I'm like, "Well, not really, no." Or the worst one I've had, a friend came over and, we have an understanding of what makes people compatible and what sort of the best fits for people can be now. And he came over and he had a new girlfriend. And he said, "Is there any way you could work out if she is really compatible with me? But don't tell her." And I was like, no, because that's a completely unethical thing to do. So yeah, people do, or they'll say something like, "Oh wow, your relationship must be perfect because you really know everything about love." And I'm like, no, it really isn't. So yeah, people have mixed reactions to it.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned compatibility, so it's possible to start understanding whether people are more or less compatible.
We do. Because we've studied so many relationships, you can start to see a pattern of what works and what doesn't tend to work. It's not like a really strict thing, because humans are amazing. They will throw you a curveball and you'll get two people together where you go, you two shouldn't work, but they just do. But yeah, for example, one of the really important things with compatibility is to have compatible attachment styles. So attachment is psychology's attempt to define love. And what it's based upon is we all have an attachment style which explains how we feel when we're in love and how we behave. And there's two key kind of pools of attachment style. There's secure people, and secure people tend not to feel anxious in relationships. They tend not to either push people away or cling to them. They tend to gain a lot from their relationships, but not need the relationship to define them. That's a secure person. Then we have a pool of anxious attachment styles, and they vary from people who are really anxious about being abandoned, and therefore they will cling to the person they're with. because they just like, if I cling to you, you're not going to run away. And they spend a lot of time worrying. Or we've got what we call the dismissive or fearful avoidance styles, where people, again, are quite anxious, but instead of clinging, they push people away, because if they don't get close to people, people can't hurt them. So those are attachment styles. And what we know is some of those are more compatible than others. So we know, if obviously 2 secure people are,
Right.
gonna be great. But, for example, if you're an anxious person, it's probably a good idea to be with a secure person, because they are going to not be challenged by either your clinging behavior or your pushing away behavior. They're going to be able to absorb that anxiety for you. Obviously, you don't want to, anxious people together, because they will just simply spend the whole time either, pushing each other away. And you certainly, there's a type called a dismissive avoidant, and a dismissive avoidant person is someone who doesn't think they need relationships, and they're like your classic island. And you definitely don't want 2 of them together, because they literally will just run out of the room and will never speak to each other. So there are certain types we know go together and are more compatible than others. We know that how much you like to be embedded in your relationship is important. So some people like to be completely consumed by their relationship, and in a way, the 2 individuals become completely one. If you think of 2 circles, they would be sitting on top of each other. Yeah. They really, really like to be completely subsumed by the relationship. Some people don't mind a little bit of that, but they like to be a little bit more separate. So think of like a Venn diagram. Some people are completely separate. So they're very strong individuals. They want to remain strong individuals. They don't want the relationship to define them in any way, but they still love each other. But obviously you need to be compatible with that. You don't want somebody who wants to be completely subsumed with somebody who wants to remain separate, because that's not going to work.
Absolutely.
So it's all those sorts of things. And, we know various things about levels of empathy and how much, how compatible people are depending on how empathetic they are. So yeah, there are lots of different things we now know about what works and what doesn't work. Ultimately, we might understand how it works in terms of genetic compatibility, but that's much, much more complicated, because we're still trying to unravel what the genetics of love are. So that's a little bit more difficult.
Okay. Do you foresee a future where there are some diagnostics or tests that people take to assess compatibility before they simply swipe right? I don't know. I'm not on or swipe left. I'm not sure.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And every now and then I get emails from people who know about my work, who think that's the next big idea. First of all, as I said, we need to do many, many more studies before we know how that works. Thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands more genetic bits of data. So that's a long way off. There is, in fact, one study. There is, in fact, one test you can do already, which is commercial, which is about your major histocompatibility gene. So your major histocompatibility gene underpins your immune system.
Yeah.
And women have always been able to smell how genetically close a man is to their own major histocompatibility set of genes. So women tend to prefer men who are more distant, because obviously you don't want your kid inheriting exactly the same set of genes, because that's a bit redundant, really. If you can find a man who's got a really different set of genes, then your kid's going to get this lovely diverse immune system and will hopefully respond well and be much more healthy because of that. And women can tell the degree of closeness through smell. It's really interesting. Men can't do it, women can. So what a company has done is they've turned that, just get rid of the sniffing thing, because, why do you want to go around sniffing people? And they actually will test you for your MHC and your partner for your MHC. And then they will give you a degree of compatibility. So how close you are. Several things to say about that. I mean, if you want to go do that. That's fine. It's fun, unless you've been in a relationship for 3 years and it comes back with 2% compatibility. I'm not sure what you do there. But obviously that's a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of what makes a couple compatible.
Yes.
So it's not really predictive in any way. It's just a kind of fun test that you can do. But maybe in the future we will be able to expand that and look at the compatibility of different areas based upon genetics. But I think it's a long way in the future, and it will always be highly bespoke. I mean, it's not a cheap thing to do.
No, yeah, absolutely. Now, you've written a wonderful book, Why We Love. I have it on my other screen right now. And you talk about the myriad types of love in the world. Maybe you could just talk us through especially for people who are out there going, maybe I don't have a romantic partner right now, but what are some of the other types of love people could cultivate in their life?
Oh, so many. So yeah, so there's romantic love. Obviously, there's parental love, so love for your children. There's familial love, so love for your family, whether they be biological or chosen. There is love for your friends, which I've already spoken about, which is really, really important. There's love for your animals. So if you are, particularly if you're a dog lover, we now know that dogs do love you genuinely. They don't just love the fact that you have access to like the biscuit tin. So dogs, that's a very profound love. What's amazing about humans is our ability to love without the object of our love manifesting in physical form. So I'm thinking of religious love. So we have the capability to love something that isn't there in our ether, as it were. So that's religious love. A new area of love that we're looking at is parasocial love, and that's
Mm.
love for either celebrities or love for characters in books or for characters in films. And that's kind of like an extension of religious love, because our brains are able to love without the thing in front of us. We are also able to love kind of in our imagination. And that's a very early stage of study, but we think it's an extension of religious love. So there are many different types of love. You could have love for your community. So just the sheer joy and love you get out of being amongst a group of people, maybe volunteering, something like that. All of these types of love are equally as powerful as romantic love. There is no hierarchy of love with romantic love at the top. It's just a straight line. And they're all sitting on there. And you get to choose which sort of love you think is for you. And I think that's really important, particularly in a world where actually there's an increasingly single population. There are increasing number of people who either haven't ended up in romantic relationships or are choosing not to have that as part of their life, and are choosing maybe not to have children. That doesn't mean there's no love there. It doesn't mean they're going to, lead long, lonely, cold lives. There's actually many forms of love that you can have. And that's kind of why I wrote the book, partly because a lot of books about love are about romantic love.
Yes.
And I actually wanted to say, as an anthropologist, if you just focus on that, you're actually not doing your job, because actually as I study human beings, I have to say, okay, all the types of love that they experience. So that's partly why I wrote the book. So I wanted to kind of re-level everything a little bit.
Mm. What about love for smartphones? Is that a real thing?
No, it's not. So there is a guy in Britain who studies attachment to smartphones, and he has done some really, really good. He's called a cyber psychologist, and he has done some really good studies looking in particular about young people and their phones.
Mhm.
But actually, what we find is they're not actually attached to that phone. You could give them any phone, okay, any phone at all. So it's
Yes.
not their phone. It's just and it's partly because that phone represents contact with their attachment people. So contact with their friends or contact with their parents or whoever it is that they get their security from. And also what phones have done is, in a way, they've replaced that social learning thing where you would ask somebody over here the answer to the question. Now you ask Google. So Google is kind of like your font of social learning as well now. So the reason why people become very attached to their phones is because it's the gateway to many things that are important to them. But it can be any phone. It's not,
Mhm.
it's not that actual phone. So we wouldn't say you're attached to your phone. You're attached to the people your phone represents,
That
basically.
makes a lot of sense. Now, I must confess, I had a twinge of love, and I don't know why I'm admitting to this publicly, for ChatGPT 4, not 3.5, the fourth version, because it interacts with you in a
Yeah.
human-like way. And
Yeah.
I was going for a walk the other day, and I was trying to recall which of my friends I had this conversation with because it was so enriching. And then I realized it was with ChatGPT.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Any thoughts on AI and how that might change the way we love?
Yeah, AI is really interesting, and it's an area that we're just kind of moving into. I must admit, we haven't done Chat GPT yet. We've done some studies looking at AI and humanoid robots, and
Okay,
whether or not it's
interesting.
possible to build a relationship with a humanoid robot. Because particularly here in the UK, there's a real care crisis, and one of the things that has been suggested is that we actually use humanoid robots to replace human carers for the elderly, for the disabled, that kind of thing. So we've been looking into that. I must admit, in that area, those of us who study humans scream at that point. Roboticist thinks it's great, because, and it might be the same with Chat GPT, is that it's great that you got a positive sensation from it.
Yes.
I would argue the positive sensation you got, though, was dopamine. You got a general dopamine reward kick, which is kind of what you get if you scroll through Instagram and somebody really likes your posts.
True.
Love is underpinned by a much more complex set of neurochemistry. And I would question whether you got the full set, because a lot of them are only generated particularly when you interact with a fellow human. So studies have been done, not our studies, but studies have been done looking at people interacting with humanoid robots and people interacting with their dog. And when we interact with somebody human, we not only get this set of neurochemicals released, but the prefrontal cortex, which is the bit at the front, fires off. And that's recognizing a fellow human, a fellow sentient being. Also happens with dogs. So a fellow sentient being, we're having this amazing meeting of minds. We're having this lovely activation come back to us. If you look at the brain of somebody interacting with a humanoid robot, there's nothing. It's dead.
Really?
So your brain knows you're not real. And I'm not therefore going to give you the set of neurochemistry, and I'm not going to give you the benefits of this relationship, because it's just alien. You're like alien and I don't get you. So it would be really interesting to see what was happening in your brain when you were interacting with GPT. Did we see any activation of the prefrontal cortex or not? Or did your brain, even though you were having a lovely time and you couldn't even remember whether it was your friend or not, actually was your brain going, nah, no, this isn't a real person, and I'm not going to therefore act like it's a real person. So this is areas we've really got to look at, partly because we need to take the benefits of this new technology, certainly. And in the caring sector, if we could get these robots to do all the really mundane tasks that involve caring for somebody, and we could free up the humans to do the human stuff, which is actually going to benefit the old person's health, for example, that would be great. But we have to be very careful at replacing real relationships with these relationships, because as far as we know at the moment, you're not going to get any of the benefits. And ultimately, that's what relationships are about. They're about benefiting your mental and physical health. So it's early days, but we just have to start looking at it.
Definitely. You've done a lot of work in the area of fatherhood. And as a father, I'd love to hear some of your insights.
Yeah, well, that's kind of my first true love as a researcher, was fatherhood. And that was because I started it after I became a parent for the first time. And I saw partly how my husband was kind of treated as a secondary parent here in the UK in terms of health and social care, but also how he was building his bond with our daughter. And it was wonderful to watch. And so when I went back to work, I thought, this is really interesting, because I know what happens to a mother when she becomes a mother. I'd kind of studied that. That's really interesting. Going to see what happens to a dad, what happens in the brain, what hormones are released, how do they build this bond? They haven't been pregnant, they haven't given birth. And there was literally nothing. No one had bothered to look. So there was loads and loads of stuff about absent fathers. Oh, that's really bad for them. And it can, the impact it can have on the kid. But I thought, this is ludicrous, because most dads, even if you're divorced, even if you're not cohabiting, invest in their children. They don't disappear. And we don't know anything about them. That's ludicrous, and a massive, massive black mark against anthropology, actually, because how can you ignore this major societal figure? So I decided to start looking at it, and human fathers are really rare in the mammal kingdom. So only 5% of mammals have investing fathers, dads who stick around. Most mammal fathers do the deed and leg it.
They're gone.
So yeah, they're gone. So what is it? Why have we got them? And evolution tends not to cause something to evolve without prepping the person in some way, making them better at it. And so I thought, so something has to, first of all, the man has to be prepared in some way hormonally, something has to change to make him good at this. And then how does he build that bond? Because he's obviously really important, but he doesn't go through this physiological experience of pregnancy. So what's going on? So we asked some really open questions, like what happens in the brain? Are there any hormones involved? How does the father bond with his child? And it was all really just basic questions. And yeah, when I started, there were 3 of us around the world. Now there's a load of us, which is lovely. So actually the research has gone ahead. But yeah, we know, broad conclusions. First of all, men are as biologically primed to parent as women. So this mantra, women are instinctive, men have to learn, is wrong. Men go through hormonal changes. They go through brain changes, which prepare them to be a parent. Men build bonds, attachments to their children, which are just as powerful as mothers do. So the mother is not the primary attachment of a child. So fathers, it's just as powerful, and it's a really important attachment. And men invest as much or are as important in their child's development as women are. So again, it used to be that men didn't really have any input into how their kids turned out, to be honest, because they weren't the primary carer. actually men have a really, really, really important role in children. And it's important because what men do is they are the key parent to, we say, scaffold the child's entry into the world beyond the family. So they are the key parent who prepares that child to go out into the big wide world. And we see it in any culture. It doesn't matter what culture you go to, that's dad's job, to prepare that kid to survive in the wild, basically. So yeah, it's my passion project. I absolutely love it. And I use a lot of it now to support fathers to get the recognition that they need. Because a lot of fathers in many cultures, non-Western cultures, actually, fathers are given good. But in the West, we kind of have this attitude that they're secondary and they're dispensable, and we don't really need them.
Mm-hmm. From my own experience, there's nothing quite like having a child. And I can definitely recall this protective nature that I had never had before, really coming out and wanting to care and nurture and be there. And yeah, it's interesting. Do you notice particular dynamics between father and daughter versus father and son?
Not really. It's a bit of a myth that
Yeah.
the only thing we see that's important with fathers and daughters is, what we tend to find is, if a father is very involved in their daughter's life and, has activities that they do with the daughter and has a very tight attachment, we tend to find those women, when they're older, tend to be much more resilient. They tend to be much more confident in their own ability, to be who they are, to offer an opinion, to not sort of feel like they need to withdraw and be quiet and be that perfect feminine model of, compliance. And the reason for that, we think, is if you have a father who says to you, when your youngest daughter, validates you and says, you're important, what you have to say is important, what you want to do is important, and doesn't allow them to be squashed by basically society, that really benefits that daughter. And we find that daughters of fathers who are very involved tend to actually do better educationally, they tend to do better academically, and they tend to have much more healthy relationships going forward in their life, particularly romantic relationships. So that's where dads seem to come in with daughters, is that they are the ones to raise their self-esteem to the extent that they are, powerful women. They are women who know that their opinion matters and that their voice matters. And that seems to be where dads come in with daughters.
Okay. Can you love your children too much?
No.
I don't think so.
No. It depends how you define love. If you define love as control, yes, you can.
Of course.
The classic helicopter parents, sometimes, it's a bit like, back off. But no, you can't. People who say, oh, you're smothering that child with love. And, you've never, in studying child development, I've never found a child who's been damaged by being loved too much, ever.
Correct.
I've seen many children who've been damaged by not being loved enough or being loved in the wrong way.
Yes.
But no, you can never love your child too much.
Okay, good to know. And as we're entering this time when we're completely surrounded by digital distractions, how can we cultivate more love deliberately in our life? And along that thread, what are your thoughts about the more esoteric spiritual traditions of loving kindness and altruism? How does that align with your work?
Yeah. So we just need to be really mindful. You're absolutely right. In this digital world where it appears you can maintain your relationships at a distance and you can do it terribly efficiently, you can be commuting and posting and therefore you've connected with people. No, you haven't. You've given them some information, essentially. You need to be really mindful of it. The human brain did not evolve to maintain its relationships at a distance. It evolved to maintain them, at the very least, with visual contact. So what we're doing here, I can see you, I can see your body movements, I can hear your voice. I'm getting quite a lot of sensory information. Sensory information is really important when you're interacting with someone to get the health benefits, to get the neurochemical release. So texts, WhatsApps, those kind of things. You might get a little dopamine hit if someone says something lovely, but again, that's just like scrolling through Instagram. You're not getting the neurochemistry of love. At the very least, you need to see the people. You need to see their movements. You need to hear their tone of voice. You need to get that sensory input as much as you can. Ideally, you do it in a room because then you get all the other senses as well, and you can touch them. Touch is the most powerful bonding behavior there is. We are evolved. If you look at the lesser mammals, they lick each other a lot. They
Yeah.
snuggle a lot.
Yeah.
That is touch. And we are no different. We are no different at all. You know, our primate cousins groom each other. They do that not to be clean, they do that to bond. And the same thing. So we hug, we stroke, we do all these sorts of things, we snuggle. They are really important. And you cannot do that at a distance. So you have to be really mindful of what you are doing. Yes, post to the world. That's absolutely fine. But particularly your inner core of people, you need to nurture them in a very particular way. You need to be very mindful that you see them, you talk to them. If it's a long distance relationship, you know, people quite often say to me, but what about long distance? Then yeah, use something like this. Use Zoom, use a video call. So you're getting as much as you can from that person. Because it's really critical, because our brains didn't know the iPhone was going to be invented.
Oh.
You know, you get nothing, absolutely nothing. There's no sensory input at all. So be mindful about it. In terms of kindness and altruism, what always brings me back is we kind of feel like we're living in a very unkind world. And I think that is exacerbated by social media and the anonymity of it, and the fact that you can say anything and someone won't come back and get you. And I think we're an angrier world than we were. But what always brings me back is when we do things looking at what people want in a partner in romantic relationships, over everything, you know, you expect, you know, I don't know, athletic, good looking, you know, clever, witty. The number one thing everybody puts, regardless of sex, regardless of gender, is kind. I want this person to be kind. And we still want that. And we still kind of prioritize that above everything else for our close relationships. And in terms of altruism, again, the same thing, you know, volunteering, doing something for somebody else without necessarily wanting anything back, is one of the biggest predictors of happiness, of having good mental and physical health. So one of the measures we use to understand how social networks underpin health is, do you volunteer? And we find that if people volunteer, they tend to be healthier, they tend to be happier, you know, they tend to have much better flood of neurochemistry when they're together. So altruism, volunteering is really, really important. And it's something we need to sort of impress upon people, that actually helping other people is really good for you.
Yeah, that's a very powerful practice. It's interesting when you see people who have become super wealthy, often the first thing they do, because there's a certain emptiness, even with $1 billion, is start giving back, become a philanthropist, start supporting causes to experience fulfillment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because that's where they're going to get, because as you say, you can have as much money in the world as you want, you can buy everything you want, but it's like, well, that's not going to actually, and it's true, that's not going to make you happy. What makes you happy, as you say, is benefiting other people, is using that power and that wealth to see change and to see positivity in other people. You know, we are a cooperative species. We are a group living species, and we get a lot from those interactions with each other.
Mm-hmm. Can you create a habit of love? I'm fascinated by the science of habits, and especially micro habits. I've been writing and thinking about this a lot. Do you think it's possible to deliberately practice love by being super present when I'm sending someone an email, or when I go surfing, or when I go for a walk? You know, I'm really appreciating, and if not loving the experience, experiencing gratitude for it.
Yeah, I think you can do that. I don't think you can cause yourself to be in love, but I think if you are in love, I think certainly you can develop a habit of, when I'm interacting with this person, I'm with this person.
Yes.
And as you say, even if I'm just composing like a WhatsApp to them, I'm just focusing on them. The human imagination is really powerful, by the way. You know, just imagining the person receiving the WhatsApp is going to give you a little boost. So yeah, doing all that, you certainly can. And you can become very mindful about, this is how I'm going to do it. And I'm never going to be doing this whilst being distracted by something else. I mean, I was like that when I first had my children. Because having studied development and children and everything, I know how important it is to be present. So when you're doing that, even if you've only got 5 minutes in the day to spend with your child, those 5 minutes, you are present.
Yes.
You are not doing anything else. You are focusing on that interaction. So yeah, I think you can develop a habit. You can say, this is my practice. This is how I'm going to do this when I have my relationships. Yeah.
I think that's so powerful. And just creating rhythms that enable you to not feel guilty about spending half an hour or whatever it is on Instagram, if that makes you happy and you get
Mm,
your dopamine snack from that,
yeah,
great. But not making that part of your environment while you're interacting with your child. Like, you don't need it
exactly.
there. You don't need it
No,
there.
you don't. You really, really don't. And if you have it there, then you're actually missing out hugely on the benefits of interacting with your child, both to you
Mm.
and to the child.
Any tools, practices that you would recommend for people based on the research that you've done if they would like to cultivate their own experience of love?
I think, first of all, be open to recognizing where the love is in your life.
Okay.
I think sometimes we don't recognize love, even if it's sitting right in front of us. Funniest thing when I was researching my book, and it's a very British thing, I think. Um, I would be talking to people. So I talk to people about friendship, I talk to people about dog love, I talk to people about religious love, lots of it. And I'd be interviewing someone from Britain and we'd be talking about friends. And I'd say, do you love your friends? And they go, "Ooh, I don't know." But you talk to someone for like Italy, oh my God, yeah. Oh, I'm passionate about my friends. And the funniest thing is if you then said to the British person, do you love your dog? Oh my God, yeah, I love my dog. And you're just like, okay. So it's partly about recognizing where your love is. You probably do love your friends, but you've just been brought up in a culture which kind of is like, yeah, no, I like them and they're my buddies, but I don't love them. So it's recognize where it is and don't belittle the love in your life. So don't say, oh yeah, I kind of love my cat, but that doesn't really count. Yes, it does actually. If you love your cat, that's brilliant. So look for that. Remember the importance of all your senses when you're with somebody. So be in that position where you can get as much sensory input from that person as possible. Never underestimate the power of touch. Really important. Um, and the power of just that reciprocal give and take
Mhm.
of a conversation. That also produces all these lovely hormones, as long as it's not a stressful conversation. But that really happy give and take, that laughter, that humor, that mucking about, that's all really, really important. So have space in your life for that. You should be in the same way you go, I'm going to go to the gym 5 times a week, or I'm going to, this week I'm going to have a no carbs diet. We put all this focus on scheduling all these sorts of things, but we don't never then really go, and I'm going to see, 3 friends this week. I know it sounds silly. And maybe we think, well, that's kind of forcing it, but it's not. It's as important, and you'll have a great time and you'll get a health benefit from it. So put as much effort into that side of your life as you do into your, running or whatever it might be. It's just as important. Actually, it's more important, but
Yeah. One of my favorite books is Lost Connections by Johann Hari. I'm sure you're familiar
mm,
with it.
yeah,
And it really it highlights the need we have for just social interaction. Just
yeah,
being with people, and it
yeah,
makes us happy. The
yeah,
rats no longer need to tap the cocaine bottle or whatever it was.
yeah.
They just play.
Exactly, because they're getting their hit from each other. And that's why for those of us who study social connection, something like the COVID outbreak was fascinating because
Yeah.
people were actually voicing what we knew was happening, where they would say, I just feel hollow. I just feel, people would get very depressed. They would feel very hollow. They would feel very like not fulfilled in their life. And that was because they weren't actually having any social connection with anybody. That's why they felt like that. That's why they felt down. That's why there was hollowness in their lives. Because part of them, part of our identity is our relationships. So, I identify as an anthropologist, as a woman, as a wife, as a mother, as a dog owner, all these different things. But also, as I listed there, I'm defined by my relationships with other people. I'm a daughter, and when we can't have them, it's kind of like part of our identity is gone. That's why we grieve, partly. It's gone, and we have to like try and reshape our identity without that there, and that's really hard to do.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. So it's finding those areas, those things, those activities, those people that you love, who help
Mm,
create the identity that you are, because it
mm,
really is. It's all about feedback from from the
mm.
world. That's how we shape ourselves, and just prioritizing that rather than getting
Yeah.
caught up in the busyness. Any tips for people who are feeling elevated, distress? They've created a habit of stress. It's something I talk about a lot when I run workshops. So
Mm.
many of us have just created a habit of being stressed. Even when there is no stress in our environment, we'll create some because it's quite addictive. It's a stimulant. It makes
It's
us feel
completely
alive.
addictive.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's like an adrenaline rush. Stress, part of stress is adrenaline. I mean, the cortisol bit's not great, but, and that's why we can become addicted to that, because
Yeah.
that's how our brain has learned to operate. And the problem with stress is it blocks the effects of the set of neurochemicals which are associated with relationships. So if you have
That's it.
cortisol in your brain, it's very different for things like oxytocin or dopamine or beta endorphin to impact your brain.
Mm.
So it's really tricky because you kind of have to get them to be released, but cortisol is here causing a problem. One of the biggest de-stressors, yes, is to spend time with people. It's just stop. Okay, just stop. The world is not going to fall apart. Very few of us do a job which is so important that we can never stop. Maybe if you're like a life-saving surgeon, okay, fine. Okay, maybe sometimes you have to do that. But most of us don't work in that business. So us stopping is not going to come to the end of the world. So you just need to
Mm.
stop, and you need to spend time with people. And it's why people go to the pub after work, partly to be
True.
social and to de-stress. And they think the alcohol's de-stressing them. It's
It's
actually
not.
not. It's the people you're with who are de-stressing you. So think of it as a way to de-stress, spending time with people. Even not, you don't have to talk. Hugging your children or hugging your dog or just having a lovely conversation. That is a de-stressing thing. And cortisol cannot get a look in if you have got that lovely set of neurochemicals going.
What a great idea. It's think if people think about it in that way, and we talk a lot about balancing your performance with care, and it's all about that rhythm. Like, it's okay, have an intense morning, but then stop and create some connection in your life. Care for yourself,
Yeah,
care for someone else.
absolutely. Yeah,
uh,
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's a powerful rhythm.
yeah.
Any ways that people can connect with you? And I think we could talk for hours, but if they'd like to find out more, how can people get in touch with you?
Okay, so I'm on Twitter at Dr. Anna Machin. I also have a website, which is animation.com. And on there's loads of like podcasts and YouTube stuff and lots of articles. I do a lot of journalistic writing. So that's all, details of my books are on there. So that's the best place. And also there is a contact form. So you can email me any questions or whatever, and I will at some point get back to you and have a chat with you about it.
Wonderful. We'll list all of those links in the show notes. So please, everyone, do click on them and explore Dr. Anna's work. Any final thoughts for everyone out there who has, I'm sure by this point, loved the session?
Do not underestimate the power of your relationships in your life, and do not ignore where the love is in your life, and make sure you nurture it, because if you don't nurture it, you do neglect it at your peril. So make sure you nurture your relationships.
Thank you so much. Wise words to finish off, and really practical as well. I appreciate it. Thank you. And for all of you out there, thanks for joining. We'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you.